Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Impact Career Series here at the Marshall Institute at the London School of Economics. This series is gonna explore how different individuals build purpose-driven careers, often across different sectors and in ways that do not always follow a set trajectory. We are gonna be speaking to professionals who have transitioned into impact-first roles. We will hear about their pivotal moments, their doubts, the lessons that shape their paths. So whether you're already in an impact role or just starting to explore what a career with purpose looks like, we hope that these short, sharp interviews and stories will inspire you and provide kind of practical, tangible insight and advice. But before we launch the series officially with our first interview, I wanted to take a second to introduce myself and also tell you a little bit about the Marshall Institute. So my name is Carlos Miranda, and I am a very proud LSE alumni. And I also, I'm very proud to be a practitioner in residence at the Marshall Institute. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I have started 3 successful businesses, all of them very much in the social impact space. With my hat on as a practitioner in residence, I kind of focus on working with my colleagues, but also mostly with the students on kind of that intersection of entrepreneurship and social impact. I split my time, like I said, between a variety of different businesses that I started, most notably a firm called IG Advisors. But that's for another time. In terms of the LSE's Marshall Institute, really, we exist to improve the impact and effectiveness of private action for public benefit. And I'm glad that the transitions work. Look at that, it's the first time doing it. Well, anyway, we do this in 3 ways. One is by accelerating the impact of individuals through transformative teaching programs. More information about this will be provided in the comments and at the end of the session. The second way we do this is by advancing the impact of knowledge through research and convening. We unite experts, academics, impact first funders, students, alumni, founders, and just a wide community to really help shape conversations and solutions. And last but not least, we scale the impact of social ventures through our work at 100x Impact, which is the Marshall Institute Accelerator. And it's a world-leading accelerator that supports social innovations with hopefully the potential to impact millions, if not billions of lives. What else to say? So, we strongly believe that now, really now more than ever, we need to invest in leaders who are committed to shaping the way organizations are started, how they're run, how they're funded, and to help those who seek to embed social impact into all aspects of their work. I think it's a beautiful transition to get us going. And without further ado, I am delighted to introduce the very first guest in our Impact Career Series, Caitlin Semo.
Hi, Carlos.
Hi, Caitlin. Welcome. Before we get started, let me just tell everybody a little bit about you, and then I'm going to start asking you a couple of questions. Caitlin, I must say you are very, very impressive. And, I'm so excited to have you here because, as an aside, both Caitlin and I did our undergraduates at NYU and our masters at the London School of Economics. So I'm so that's too much of a coincidence. So I'm very glad that we have this nice little connection.
Go Violets, exactly. The NYU mascot.
Exactly. Well, Caitlin is a senior vice president and the head of partnerships and events at the Edelman Trust Institute. We will hear a lot more about that in a second. There, she leads collaborations with research and experts across academia and the nonprofit sector to shape Edelman's global trust research. And again, we'll hear about what that means. Before Edelman Trust Institute, she spent nearly a decade at RED, the global health nonprofit founded by Bono and Bobby Shriver that most of us are familiar with. And there, she led social impact partnerships, co-creating campaigns to fight HIV/AIDS and COVID-19. Her experience also spans community organizing, political fundraising, and advocacy across the US and beyond. Caitlin is also, as noted, a proud alumni of the LSE Executive Masters in Social Business and Entrepreneurship. And today she brings a thoughtful cross-sector perspective on building meaningful and impactful career. Hope I did you proud, Caitlin.
Yeah, thank you for being so nice.
I mean, amazing, right? Okay, so Caitlin, to kick things off, tell us a little bit about the Edelman Trust Institute and tell us about your role and like, what is it that you actually do day to day?
Yeah, good question. Well, first off, thanks to the LSE team, Marshall Institute, Carlos, for having me on and being the guinea pig for this series. More than happy to do so.
Right.
So yes, as Carlos mentioned, I lead partnerships and events for the Trust Institute. What is that? Essentially, it's a think tank that's studied to advancing the study and measurement of trust in society. Trust is, as I think we all know, so foundational and core to what we experience day to day even. But in this case, everything we do is based off of our proudest thought leadership, which is the Edelman Trust Barometer. The Trust Barometer has actually been measuring trust for 25 years in business, NGOs, media, and government worldwide. It's one of the largest surveys dedicated solely to the study of institutional trust and is quite well known in thought leadership spaces. But 4 years ago, they decided that they want to create a think tank that houses the research, but goes beyond it to understand how can we evolve insights related to the study of trust and also start to action these insights. We talk about trust a lot, but who's actually building trust in society? How can we elevate that? How can we learn from that at scale? So that's a bit about what I do day to day, is essentially working with external subject matter experts, largely from academia and nonprofits, to inform the work we do, amplify our study and measurement of trust, and also action and do something about trust building. So that's what I do day to day. I work with an incredible team of researchers, experts in respective fields, learning about trust and learning about how trust is built in various sectors and various areas of issues and societal issues, relating to trust in healthcare, trust in climate change, trust in combating systemic racism here in the US. It's incredibly vital work, something I'm very proud of.
And how do you guys define trust, out of curiosity?
Ooh, if we had another half hour. Trust is essentially it's a relationship. It involves being vulnerable. It portrays competence. It's about ethics. It's about reciprocity. I hope you trust me, Carlos, because you brought me on here, and I trust you because clearly you weren't going to do me dirty on this LinkedIn Live.
Yeah.
But trust is so foundational and core to every relationship, whether it be between each other, whether it be with society, communities, or whether it be with institutions. It's incredibly multidimensional. It's incredibly layered. It's really hard to build and very easy to lose.
Yeah.
As we know from seeing it in times of crises or seeing it in day to day. So it's hard to define. It's even harder to practice trust building.
And I kind of appreciate the complexity of it. And I think that what you said is right. It's one of those things that it's, you can recognize it and it can be easily lost, right, without necessarily being able to define it.
Yeah, it's there are people who spend decades studying it, but then I wonder sometimes how often actually put it into practice. It's incredibly difficult. And it's something that's a constant ongoing behavior that we all have to practice every day, is how do you build trust? Action does build trust, but what does that mean? So that's a bit of what we sort of delve into here at the Trust Institute.
That's amazing. And can you tell us, I would love to kind of hear a little bit about your career, because obviously, we're here talking about you and we want to learn about your career. I'd love to hear about your career trajectory and how long have you been, tell us a little bit more if your role has evolved at Edelman Trust Institute, but then also like what were you doing before at RED? And I'd love to kind of hear how you got into this kind of social impact first career.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, to take a step back, I'd always wanted to work in social impact. I just don't think I ever would have defined it that way. Yeah. I knew like at a very cliche baseline level, I wanted to help other people. I couldn't just go into a normal 9-to-5 where I'm selling a product or like, trying to, just work a 9-to-5. That was never something the traditional route I wanted to do. And I knew that since I was a kid, and I was, volunteering quite a bit, getting involved in local nonprofit work, essentially just participating in my community. And when I went to NYU for my undergrad, I wanted to spend time and understand how to make a career out of that. So throughout college, actually, I give some credit to NYU, and then I'll give some credit to LSE, but I'll give some credit to NYU first, our alum, and just say I spent since I started there, I worked out what I wanted to focus on and what I didn't want to focus on. I worked for art museums. I worked for an animal shelter. I worked for a NYU civics team. I worked for, I was a market stylist during fashion weeks. I did everything. And I worked, and of course, I spent quite a bit of time, given my major was in politics, I spent quite a bit of time in community organizing and political campaigns, because I, like any 18, 19-year-old, thought, okay, well, change starts with the public sector. So why don't I go in and do work and see what that's like? Well, I learned a bit about that from spending some time in the Hill, spending some time in campaigns, and realized maybe I don't want to go that way. Yeah. But that led me ultimately to actually starting my career actually as an intern at Red. And I learned a lot about what it's like to actually foster change in a unique and innovative way, because at the time Red was so new. It was like a type of ethical consumerism that no one had seen yet, right? You partner with massive companies to create products that don't cost any more or less than what you typically buy, but in this case they trigger a contribution to fight HIV/AIDS. And I thought that was very cool. I liked the smart consumerism element of it, but I also loved the impact element of it. So I actually started as an intern there way back when. And that led to me actually building my career. I left briefly and then came back as a freelancer, then came back full time, and really grew and evolved my role in different ways based off of what I enjoyed and what I was good at. I started there actually as working on their food and beverage campaign, Eat Red, Save Lives, which is something I'm still very proud of, which worked with the culinary community to raise awareness. You could work with food trucks, you could work with bars, you could work with hotel groups, you could work with, really cool CPG companies, and create Red culinary products that generated money and generate awareness for the AIDS fight. And I thought that was great. But I also really was drawn to a lot of principal engagement work. So I spent a lot of time working with Red's principals, managing their priorities and strategies. So it was a lot of just relationship management and stakeholder engagement. But at the end of the day, it was for an amazing cause, which I hate that phrase, but it really was. I say I hate an amazing cause because I found that to be very outdated language, but Red was just doing something so innovative that I'd not really seen before in the nonprofit world. So it led me to be there for a decade, and I grew in that role to become their associate director of impact and special projects, and just was working on the full gamut of amazing opportunities and really smart, innovative campaigns that drove awareness, that drove money, and ultimately was help saving people's lives. So I was doing that. And then I heard about this cool program that the LSC was doing. It was very new. I actually, fun fact, Stephen Chambers, the director of the Marshall Institute, he and I happened to have some mutual connections. I met him back when he was starting the first cohort of the Marshall Institute. And he said, we're running this program. Would you want to be a guinea pig and try it? And I actually said, no, I'll pass this.
Yeah.
And waited for the second cohort.
Yeah.
But I say that in the context of the question you asked, Carlos, because that program ultimately made me realize I wanted to do something different from what I'd been doing at Red. It really opened my mind to say, not just about what I could be as an entrepreneur, what can I be as an intrapreneur, which I think was really skills that I wanted to leverage that I hadn't been tapped yet, but that the Marshall Institute helped me experience. And that's how I actually found myself at Edelman. They were starting a think tank back in 2021, the Trust Institute. Yeah. They didn't really have a strategy. They didn't have the legs for it. They didn't have partners. They just knew that they wanted to do this. And I remember talking to my now boss, who said, are you okay with fully blank slating this and helping build something? And I said, yes, because I realized I could take everything I learned from the Marshall Institute and apply it in this setting. And here I am now in a role that has completely evolved and shifted. I'm head of partnerships, but I do so much more than that. As I'm sure many people watching this experience, when you're at a small, nimble organization, you do a lot of different roles that you didn't necessarily expect. So that's kind of the trajectory, like, long story short, of how I ended up here.
That's amazing. I didn't want to interrupt because you were such in like a great flow, and this is, it also shows, like, when people talk about their careers, when I'm asked to talk about my career at Marshall or anybody else, you talk about your career and it seems so sequential. I did this, and then that led me to this, and that led me to this. And actually, when you're going through it, it's anything but. It's like 3 steps in one direction, 1 step back. And I think being able to be nimble and adapt, those are core skills and something that I think we take a lot of pride in. It's wonderful to hear you talk about, your experience at Marshall and all of your experiences, how they've culminated to where you are right now.
Yeah.
I did want to ask, do you have a favorite red product? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, that's like, I will not, it's like picking your favorite kid. Like back, that's what we used to joke about. We couldn't say necessarily. One of my prized possessions I actually still have at home is actually not a product per se. One of the first things I worked on as an intern was on an incredible art auction that Red ran with Johnny Ive, who many people probably know because he designed the iPhone and the iPod, and amazing Australian designer Mark Newson. They worked with Sotheby's and Red to create an incredible, I think it was 60, 70 plus collection of custom designed red products that were put on sale at Sotheby's, and it raised tens of millions of dollars. And I have the auction art book from that. There were only a certain amount of made, and that sits on my coffee table at home. So that was one of my prized possessions, just because that's really how I got started. It was working on that auction.
That's awesome. I ended up selling a business to a social media agency, to Freud's Communications, and and the Freud's Communications team were very much behind all the, helping out and doing a lot of stuff with Red. So there were always kind of those Red connections.
They still do, They still, Matthew Freud, I know they work on this now. This is getting into sausage making, but yes, Freud's has always been like a big partner to Red. Just didn't become a Red promo or a Freud's promo, but yes, it's like crazy the intersectionality though of all of these groups who have been so instrumental to the success of Red, and Freud, one of them.
And it's you've talked a lot about like the influence and the impact that both your undergraduate career has had on you, but also obviously your time at the Marshall Institute. Once again, here you are being a guinea pig, so we are very grateful for that. I'd love to talk a little bit about advice, both that you've gotten and advice that you would give to students, prospective students of the Marshall Institute. And so I guess a two-part question. One is, can you think of any piece of advice that anybody's giving you that you just was like, wow, that impacted me, and maybe not necessarily at the time, but like has come, something that really changed you? And then also, what piece of advice would you give to somebody maybe, who is either changing careers, at a certain point in their lives, or they're just starting out, or they're about to get their first internship?
Yeah. So I guess they're interconnected, because one of the best pieces of advice that I still practice to this day is never think any job is too big or too small for you to do. And that was from a former boss at Red, one of the co-founders at Red. She's not a named co-founder, an incredible woman who, to this day, I take that with me, because it morphs into my piece of advice that I always give to, burgeoning, new professionals, is stay humble and stay curious. I think, the best leaders I've been able to work with, and I've been able to work with quite a few in the various roles I have. I get to work with CEOs and the business C-suite, and I work with amazing social entrepreneurs and NGO leaders and journalists and former and current government officials. I've seen it all, but the most successful leaders are those that recognize they're not the smartest people in the room, and that they can learn from experts, even if they're in, a small town or a rural village, because everyone brings their own expertise and knowledge. They might just not have the title to go with it, right? And that's just something I think everyone should understand and practice that, whether they're graduating college or whether they're 40 years into their career. And that's what I sort of took with me. I never said no to things, in the sense that I always took on projects, no matter how big or how small, even if my title surpassed those potential projects. Being able to keep those skills working is incredibly critical to continuing to build your career. And also, I find that, I've met so many incredible people, and I always remind them, I'm so glad you're so much smarter than me, because I'm learning something new every single day from you. And that's in whatever setting. I'm fortunate I'm in a job where I work with some of the smartest subject matter experts in the world on a number of topics, and I'm privileged to be in the room with them. And so for me to just be able to ask them questions and learn from them, and also be mindful that I am only one person, but if we work together, we can do something incredible. That's something I take with me. So yeah, they're very interconnected pieces of advice that I live by day to day.
No, 100%. And I think, I loved hearing you talk about kind of your entrepreneurship experience. And I think whether you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, I always tell, as someone who has started several businesses and have kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of entrepreneurship, whether you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, you got to be ready to be like founder and intern at the same time at the drop of a hat. You might be at a huge meeting with someone with a big name CEO, and the next thing is you have to be like, licking envelopes because you're doing a campaign that has to go out the next day. And I think you have to be, I think hearing you say, you have to be kind of flexible and not think that any job is too big for you is I think a real practical advice of what it actually takes to like make it in this space.
Oh yeah. I always get amused by people where it's like, oh, just because you achieve like a VP title or you become a boss doesn't mean that you ever lose what you were when you were an intern or an associate. Like that's what got you there. So I think you just have to always remember that, and it will buy you gains in the long term. Especially in the world of social entrepreneurship, where you're never going to stop being an intern, or you're going to stop ever having that intern mindset. It's so critical. And as you said, that better than anyone.
Good. Now, well, listen, I think we've taken enough of your time. I just want to say thank you so much for being our first guest in the show. And, obviously there's a theme of you being a guinea pig at the Marshall Institute, which I love. Thank you so much for your time, for giving us some wonderful, stories and feedback, and also just advice. I think everybody that's going to listen to is going to remember that, staying humble and never thinking that, you're too big for anything is I think is good life advice and good professional advice. So I just want to say thank you again, and we look forward to staying in touch and to hopefully kind of having you back at the Marshall Institute sooner rather than later.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Carlos. And thanks so much to the Marshall Institute. It's been great.
Take care.
Thanks.
So obviously, a big thank you to Caitlin. I thank you to all of you for joining us. Hopefully you found this conversation engaging and insightful. This is the first time that we do it, so we'd love to kind of hear from you. But before we wrap up, I want to make sure that everybody who's watching is going to stay connected with us at the Marshall Institute. You can stay up to date on our events, research, thought leadership by subscribing to our newsletter. You'll see the QR code right there. You can explore, obviously, our portfolio of programs, classes, the executive master's in social and business and entrepreneurship that Caitlin did, and obviously learn more about 100X, our accelerator at the following links. And we're also active on social media: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, X. And we'd love to stay in touch. Finally, I want to say that this is, like I said, this is going to be a series. Our next event is going to be on Tuesday, the 17th of June, same time, 3:00. And we're going to be speaking to Luke Nelson, who's a very good friend of mine, and who also happens to be the head of international sustainability at JP Morgan Chase. And he's going to talk about a career in corporate sustainability. We hope to see you there. And please, make sure that you share the Impact Series with people in your network. We'd love to have as many people engaged as possible. So until next time, thank you very much. Take care. Bye.